Shalom, this is about Parashat Bo, which is the 15th portion in the Torah and the third in the book of Exodus. Bo means to go, and God commands Moses to go to Pharaoh again. Now, we've already had 7 plagues. It hasn't worked. So now Moses goes to Pharaoh, and this is Exodus chapter 10 through Exodus 13:16. And so God tells Moses, tell Pharaoh we're going to keep sending those plagues. So this time Pharaoh again says, forget it, you're not leaving. So Moses brings the locusts through, of course, God. And then Pharaoh relents and summons Moses and Aaron and asks for forgiveness. But a wind comes and blows the locusts away. And Pharaoh then changes his mind, and the Torah says God stiffens Pharaoh's heart. So the first question is, what does it mean to stiffen Pharaoh's heart? Isn't that fair? Is that fair of God to do that? Most of the commentators say God didn't actually go in and do anything to Pharaoh's heart, that once you start on a road that you think you're right, and you think you're so powerful that you're godly, like Pharaoh did, you start down that bad road. It's very tough to change yourself and redirect yourself, and that's the euphemism the Torah uses for God stiffening Pharaoh's heart. Sometimes it says Pharaoh stiffened his own heart, sometimes it's Pharaoh stiffened. Heart stiffened was by God, but in any case, that's the general consensus of the commentators. So then, plague number 9 is darkness. And of course, if you read the newspapers, every periodically there are locusts that come and invade and eat everything in Egypt, and there's sometimes sandstorms that are so thick that you can't even see your hand in front of your face. Torah said that you couldn't even see your neighbor. And obviously there's a whole sermon there about sometimes our inability to have empathy and see our neighbors is a kind of darkness in our society. Again, Pharaoh doesn't change his mind, and Moses leaves Pharaoh in real anger. Sometimes anger, even though Maimonides says you should avoid anger at all costs, sometimes anger is necessary, especially when you're dealing with a genocidal maniac like Pharaoh was. Now, in between the 9th and 10th plague, God says to mark the first month of the year. We have a mitzvah here of the beginning of the year being at Nisan time. Most Jews think it's actually in September, but the Torah says we regulate the year. The first Rosh Hashanah is by the month of Nisan, when Passover falls. And then in the middle of the night, God strikes down the firstborn of Egypt. And again, how could that happen? Well, God could do whatever God wants, but many scholars believe that probably the food was tainted by some kind of botulism or something, and maybe the firstborn eat first, or hundreds of years later, when the story was finally written down, it came through as the firstborn dying. But this so changed Pharaoh and softened him because of the concern he had about his people that he relented in this case. And so the Israelites were able to split. But of course, then Pharaoh changes his mind and chases after them, and that's what happens next week in Parashat Bashalach. Now, how do we understand this in rabbinic literature? Well, first of all, Tractate Pesachim of the Mishnah, and later in the Talmud, and then the subsequent codes of Jewish law interpret the many laws of Passover that are found in this parsha. I'll go through some of them. In addition, there's a passage about tefillin, beginning of chapter 13, and the Mishnah talks about the kind of tefillin and how any of the 4 pieces of the parchment in the tefillin have to be kosher. Now, according to Sefer HaChinuch, one of the main books on the mitzvote, there are 9 positive and 11 negative commandments in this parsha. Some of them have to do with ancient rules of Passover, which don't apply since the temple was destroyed. So I'll just go through some of the ones that are relevant. First of all, the mitzvah in 12:8, Exodus 12:8, to eat the Passover lamb with matzah and maror on to mark the 14th of Nisan, and not to eat roasted meat raw or boiled. We still observe, of course, our modern Seder with matzah and maror, and we have the symbolic shank bone for the Paschal lamb. We don't sacrifice the Passover sacrifice for 2,000 years since the temple was destroyed. And then in 12:15 it says you should destroy all chametz. Watch my many videos on Passover to understand that. The commandment in 12:18 to eat matzah on the first night of Passover. So you're not obligated to eat matzah the rest of Passover, but you are on the Seder. Then in 12:19, not to find any chametz in your house. And 13:3, not to eat any chametz all the days of Passover. 13:8, you have to relate the Exodus story, and that's basically the story of the Haggadah. So there's so much to talk about here, but I just want to give you a contemporary Devar Torah this year about some items in the news. I'm doing this the day after the New Hampshire primary when McCain and Hillary Clinton won their respective primaries. And both were kind of being counted out after Obama won in Iowa and McCain did so poorly. He was almost bankrupt over the summer. Many people said he was going to drop out. And she's the comeback gal and he's the comeback kid, even though he's 71. And there's something about being, now who knows what's going to happen in the end here, but they both stayed in it. They fought hard. They continued to persevere. And there's something about that related to this story. And two other sports stories, which I always find intriguing about messages from life, which I think will help. First of all, Ohio State, and I'm a Big Ten fan, got blown out again by LSU. Second time in a row that they got blown out by a team from that conference. And the sports writers in the Chicago Tribune said it wasn't because they weren't as quick as LSU, although they maybe weren't, but the LSU people said they just weren't tough. We played a lot tougher teams, mentally tougher, said a safety from the LSU team. When they got down, they just shut it down. They stopped trying. And another story was about the Chicago Bears. I'm a big fan of the Bears, and they're not in the playoffs this year. And one of the sports writers talked about three teams who are in the playoffs this year: the Chargers, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Giants. The Bears lost to all three. And this writer was saying that if one play in each game had gone a little differently, if Brandon McGowan didn't have a ball bounce off his back, the Chargers didn't convert that recovered fumble into a go-ahead touchdown. In the case of Seattle, if Grossman had tucked the ball away instead of fumbling it, and in the case of the Giants, if Devin Hester looked the right way in a pass that went, a nice pass from Grossman, all three games could have gone the other way, and maybe the Bears would be playing, and one of those teams would be sitting home right now. Sometimes it goes on little things, and that's why Lovie Smith said the Bears are close. But they're not close enough. They have to keep pushing hard. And so my take on all three stories about these two sports stories about Ohio State and the Bears and about the New Hampshire primary is that what happened was he had 10 plagues, and Pharaoh never gave up. He kept being relentless in his desire to enslave the Israelites and commit genocide. And Moses and Aaron never gave up because God kept prompting them. They never, ever gave up. I mean, after 3 plagues didn't work, 4 plagues, 5 plagues, 6 plagues, wouldn't you give up and say we're stuck here? But they never gave up because they had the faith in God that things would work out, and they continued to persevere, and our people became free. And that, I think, is the powerful message of Passover and about a valuable lesson for our own life.